So our next presenter is Graham Mitchell. Graham is the CEO of Crown Infrastructure Partners, the government agency responsible for funding and managing UFB, and he is no stranger to our event. He's spoken several times, and each year it's good to have him back and have him give us an update. This year he's also going to be talking about rural broadband, obviously, mobile black spots, the regional digital connectivity program, infrastructure funding, financing infrastructure, as well as the Connected Marae project. I do have his presentation here. We'll just stop sharing for a moment. And there's Graham. He's there. That's good. Hello, Graham.
Hi. Cool.
Right. We'll get started. Thank you, Graham.
Okay, and I gather you're going to be my mouse, so I'll just say next. Okay, Craig. So probably as an introduction, it's always a bit of a challenge following on from the minister, because he sort of says all the policy things, and then the next question is, have we actually done them all? And I was looking back at when we did this deck, and my people did the deck. It was a little while ago since we actually presented, and actually a lot's happened in that period since June, I think, last year. And not only COVID, but actually in the rural space and the connectivity space. And I think the minister sort of added the capacity and coverage are obviously a key focus. And I think the other thing I'd like to sort of touch on there, which we are doing some work on in a certain space, is the digital divide. And when I'm talking about digital divide, I'm really talking about the whānau out there who actually can't afford broadband, which actually came to be quite a significant issue during COVID. So not so much a digital learning side, but actually the digital divide type side. So next. Right, the minister sort of covered this. So this is just an outline of the main programs that we're currently running in the telecommunication side. We are doing some work, obviously, for the next generation critical comms as well for police, fire and ambulance. But these are the core telecommunication policy ones. So the UFB, as you would know, you've seen the quarterly reports, it's going really well. I think the latest numbers are up to just ticking on 61% uptake, with a few towns and cities, in the high 70s and the 80s. So that's going very well. We'll share a bit more on it. The RBI2 mobile black spot. So RBI2 is actually all about coverage with capacity, and the mobile black spots is obviously about emergency services access on highways and tourism. PGF fibre links, so we'll touch on that. These are these large links we're building down the South Island, the Marae program, which is actually now includes some urban Marae as well, so it's not just PGF. The capacity upgrades the minister touched on, and we got some money from the IRG shovel ready program, which is actually going to assist us with filling some of those gaps the minister chatted about. So why don't we just click on to the next slide. So overall, these are sort of the high level sort of rural targets we're sitting at the moment to achieve. So there's about 851 eligible Marae that can connect, and I'll cover that, what they can actually do there. There's about 840,000 rural households and businesses that we're aiming to get improved broadband to, or coverage, because a lot of them don't actually have coverage at all, and the RBI2 program. And then there's the mobile black spots there with the state highways and that. And you can see there's a large proliferation of partners there, with the rural connectivity group being the 3 mobile operators, and quite a large number of WISPs who are very key to our deployment. And Mike's going to be touching on how the WISPs have been helping us out. Next. So this is just really where we're at currently. So about 52,000 households are covered, so it's about 62% complete. It's about 22% up from last year, so that's a good progress. Highway kilometres has actually moved up quite a bit, so now at about 45% of the targets. That's lifted up a full 33%. That was an area that we were disappointed at where we were about a year ago, and we have made really good progress with RCG on that. And tourism as well, that wasn't where we probably would have liked it, and we've lifted that up, even though it's debatable about how many tourists are actually out there at the moment, but there's lots of Kiwis going around the countryside. And the other thing is that, the WISPs, I had to say, when I talked last time, had actually made good progress in getting us up and going, and some of the commercial M&Os, but we were quite disappointed with RCG, who I think at that stage was sitting at about 20 towers. I think John Proctor's going to be talking to you later about where they are, but we're very pleased with their progress now. So we're going to hit about circa 150 towers. And within a week. That's what John's promised me. And it well and truly looks like on track. And I think you would have seen in the quarterly release here, they did 40 towers in the last quarter, which was, I think, a tremendous achievement given what was happening with COVID at the same time. That they actually got 29 commissioned during that period. So, significant change in the RCG outlook there. And of course, our WISP partners have continued to deliver strongly for us, and they're at over 50% of their coverage targets already. So we're very pleased with that, and Mike can cover more on that. Next. We sort of use a slide every year, hoping that it's going to get some traction there in the rural community. So one of the things that these networks do in rural New Zealand, which I think is very important now that agriculture is well and truly our largest industry, and you will have seen the latest export numbers that's growing, is really using these networks to make our agricultural producers more productive in the community out there. And I think there is a good opportunity there for the industry to get out there and work with them. There's a lot of value that can be added, productivity on farm out there. And they do need some technology assistance. These networks will enable, the broadband connectivity to enable these local, Internet of Things, LoRa networks or NB-IoT networks, depending on what flavour you decide to use. But the farmers and the agricultural sector are going to need assistance to get these technologies in place. And we still think this is a significant opportunity. Farm IQ has about over 10,000 users of its farm management system, and which is a little mobile phone up there, and Harvest has over 10,000 units deployed, but there are others out there, and we think that's a significant opportunity that we keep encouraging the industry to use, because we think that's another significant benefit of deploying these large rural networks throughout the country. Okay, next. This is probably one of our most challenging projects we've ever tried to do, which is build fibre in places in New Zealand, and there's a clear reason why no one had actually tried to build fibre in these two regions here, effectively from Fox to Hawea and into Milford. I think just as we're about to finalise the contract with Chorus on the Milford link, the road washed away and then we had COVID. So they said, geez, there's a bit of risk here, and there certainly is. But please say we've got those contracted now. They're fully funded, and they're actually underway. There's at least what it was a week or so ago, about 10 kilometres already built on the West Coast link. So that will be more now. Electronet's building the first part of that, so it's using local workers. And the Milford one, the Chorus is doing the as a counterparty here, took advantage of the road rebuild with the Alliance down there, the NZTA Alliance with Downers, to actually put quite a bit of conduit in there as well. And we're coordinating that activity also. We're also funding an upgrade of the actual Homer Tunnel there, which will actually have a mobile site there as well as a tourism site, but possibly some people might want to watch, their kids might want to watch Netflix as they wait for the traffic lights to change to go through the tunnel. So we're going to coordinate that with the tunnel upgrade as well. But that's, they're going to be quite key. They're going to be connecting something like 30 odd mobile towers along those links as well. And obviously enabling Haast itself, believe it or not, to get fibre to the home in that little settlement there, as well as a full 4G mobile. So it will go from a state of quite poor technology to probably having better technology than what you can get in Manhattan in the US. Next slide. So the Minister sort of touched on this, and this is what, this $15 million program that we're currently running. He talked about the RBI 1 areas, which is obviously what, was the first rural initiative, and it was targeted to get the coverage at those the capacities in those days, and although some of those speeds have been upgraded. Many will know there's a number of stop cells out there. These little red areas tell you where the stop cells are. The little dots are the households that are impacted by those stop cells. And the green ones are the ones that we've been able to solve to date with this fund, with the upgrade of those towers, which does have some limitations on its ability. And we're going to fold some of these areas in there. But it just gives you, most of you will be aware that the hotspots and the stop cells are Canterbury Plains, Tasman type areas. There's northern Waikato, Western Bay of Plenty, rural Auckland, and there's a little bit up north, but not that much. And there's obviously been some stuff in Southland as well, which we've actually managed to resolve. Next. So the next slide is a focus on what we're trying to do with IRG, and this is more complicated. I think Craig calls it the stale donut. We just called it the donut because some people might not like to think stale out there. But it's, the challenge here is twofold, is that the initial technology that was deployed under RBI1 had very large, it was good technology in its time, but had very large serving areas. So an average RBI1 tower, for example, serves 500 households. An average RBI2 tower serves about 80 on average. That's a significant difference. Also, the difference with the RBI2 towers, of course, is they have full band spectrum antennas with the latest generation of radio, latest QAM technology, fully software upgradable, and the industry's pulled all the spectrum onto those towers, while the RBI1 towers, not all of them are at that sort of level, and they don't have pulled spectrum either. So you end up with these sorts of RBI2 spectrum-rich technology, latest, fully upgradable, software defined. The RBI1, not a spectrum rich, but a large amount of density underneath them, which is exacerbated by lifestyle blocks appearing on the outskirts of urban areas. People are used to having fibre, now they find they don't have fibre, and they experience these things here. So this map here, what we've done here is we're using a planning parameter at 6 megabits per second, which is a forecast out to 2030. This is quite a technical parameter, but the UFB, for example, at peak, because not every user is using the network at the same time, but if you divided the total users by the peak bandwidth consumed on the network, it's running at a bit over 2 megs at the moment. So it's a planning parameter that you use in telco to work out, can you provide our target is 20 megabits per second in the future. In the 6 megabits per second radio wireless does about 1.5 on average at the moment, and that will ensure that there'll be enough capacity there to meet all the contiguous uses, you know, when you've got people there using the service at the same time in peak. So the same sort of hot areas there, a few others, but some of those areas we're comfortable some of the WISPs can address, but some of these areas are identified where there are no other networks as well. So it's a big program that we'll be rolling out later this year through a short form tender. Next slide. Right, the Marai program, unfortunately David Terry can't come here, and it is Maori language week, because his te reo is significantly better than me as a Pākehā. He's a Ngāti Porou, and actually if you've got good eyes, the marae on the bottom right of your screen is actually David's marae up in the far East Cape there. So you can see, you know, the maraes have significant cultural importance, obviously to whānau, hapu and iwi, and to our nation. You know, they are unique to us. We have a lot of them, and it's important to actually get them connected. You know, there are some parallel programs going on here with, actually, we managed to get it out of some of the PGF and the IRG to actually upgrade a number of these buildings at the maraes as well, including power and upgrading to the large building program being funded also by the government there as well. So, you know, the really key significant areas, you can see Tuanga Waiwai there, the National Marae, Ratana, Waitangi. We managed to get all those connected before the big events. They're actually all on fibre, all on gigabit fibre, but obviously not every marae can get on gigabit fibre, and we can touch on some of that as well. So if you flip to the next slide. Right, so these are the marae all around the country. There are a lot of them. There's 850 that are eligible, as I mentioned. I looked at the slide that I presented over a year ago. We'd had 112 applications. We've now got 462 applications. These are marae that have applied. There was a significant uplift in demand post-lockdown. And I think that comes down to, and a number of the marae have been talking to us about this, is they really are forming a digital hub for those communities, particularly the whānau, and this is the digital divide type issue, who cannot afford broadband. So you're seeing tamarikis, their children going there to do schooling. You're seeing connection with people going there to do their business, go there to coordinate, to network, when they can't afford their broadband at home. So we've connected about 254 of those. The connections are moving through quite quickly. The package that they get is the best broadband available, which is fully funded for 5 years. Essential hardware, which so we give them some Wi-Fi boosters installed, 3 internet streaming cameras. These are mainly for securities, cabling, power over Ethernet switch, a cellular booster if required, and another thing that we've just done recently, which we thought was very important because unfortunately in Island Bay they lost their marae through a large fire, is through FENZ, Fire Emergency New Zealand. We're actually going to start to, as part of the package, introduce IP smoke detectors into these marae as well, because they're very culturally significant buildings that you do not want to lose. So having those there, I think, is going to be an extra real benefit to the program. And it's great that the local fire service is actually going to help install those and help the marae actually show how they work. So if you click to the next slide, next. And this shows one of our installations here. It is a great marae in Omaha, just out of Auckland at Lee, and you can see here that this is a 4G antenna, so it's got the Yagi on the roof, it's got the Wi-Fi booster, the camera. This is the video conferencing suite we provide. So effectively the hapu can connect with their wider digital hapu, and this has proven to be more popular than we ever thought. So you're getting a lot of huis connected. It's really helping when they're having seminars on their land. And it's really extending there. In parallel, PDU is actually rolling out a training program. Just to give you an idea of how it's tracking at a regional level, so I'm going to attempt the Te Reo here, but Te Tai Tokerau is currently sitting at about 60% of the marae in Te Tai Tokerau have applied. That is the largest region in New Zealand for marae. There's about 200 marae there. Tamaki Makura, which is obviously Auckland, about 80% have actually applied there. They're part of the urban initiative. Aikogro Rauiti, which is Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wellington, about 3/4 of the marae have applied there, including the Old Maori Parliament, which is just outside Greytown, if you've actually been there. Te Tahanuuri, which is the lower Waikato, Taranaki and Manawatu, is about 50%. Waikato and Bay of Plenty is about 35%, so it's a little lower than we would have liked there. And that is the second largest area for marae in the country. And Te Whapōnamu, which is the South Island, is about 75% applied. So you can see there's some strong uptake and strong demand coming around the country there, which we're then working through with our partners to fulfill. So if we move to the next slide. And that's just the update on those numbers I sort of just mentioned to you, and actually the equipment's just moved up by 2, it's now at 178. So the connections are installed first, and then the equipment follows. And there is a bit of a lag. That's mainly because there's quite a lot of interactions that need to happen with the marae committee, the local hapu, to make sure we're meeting their needs, and obviously and our partners are actually installing that in a sensitive manner. To give you an idea on the sort of technology that's actually been deployed, so of those connections that have been made, about 35% are through WISPs, so they're Mike's members, and about 29% are through VDSL. We try to use VDSL if we can, but it has to meet certain speed requirements. 15% are through 4G or LTE, 13% are UFB, so that's basically in the small towns, and 6% are satellite. No, 6% of satellite is where there are no other options. We are, of course, installing connectivity onto the islands as well, where there are marae. For example, Chatham's a Great Barrier, have been connected, and they can only really be connected through satellite. There's another island we're installing just in the Bay of Plenty as well. So some of these are challenging locations to get connectivity through. The next slide. Tell me if I'm going right for time. It was initially fully funded by the PGF, but we actually managed to chip in some savings from CIP as well to get the, because the PGF didn't cover the 3 urban markets, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, so we found some money and put it to the cause. So we promoted that through and got ministers to agree to that this year to fund the remaining marae in those 3 urban markets. So there's the partners there that we're currently working with. Really close partnership there with the PDU and Tenepuni Kokuri. Yeah, it is working well. It is, yeah, it's a challenging initiative, but it's extraordinarily rewarding. The feedback we get from the marae once the equipment's installed and they're using it is fantastic. and the training that's going to come along is going to assist them even more. Some of these marae are extraordinarily remote. We've had to install one in Tūhoe where the technician actually had to walk the last 1.5 to 2 k's to install the equipment because there was no road. So we are reaching the far parts of New Zealand. I think that's going to help immensely with the digital divide issues as well. With those Wi-Fi extenders, that really does give a lot of benefit to the surrounding community. Right, the next slide. So UFB, the one thing about the UFB now, and everybody thinks about the big urban markets, but the thing here is this fibre network is reaching further than anybody ever thought it would ever reach. So some of these towns here are, very, very small. And the interesting thing that we've found is the uptake of some of these small towns well exceeds the uptake in the big urban market. So the highest towns that actually have uptake are all small expansion towns of, between, I think one of the smallest ones is Longburn. It's only like, 150 homes there, and it's well into the 70s. Whakawhaka, it's in the about 85. So you're getting these small communities, and it just shows you the existing copper network there wasn't as strong. You bring the fibre in there, and there's a really strong, compelling uptake. So if you look at the next slide, and I'm not going to attempt to read all these out, but it just gives you, these are all the towns that are now complete throughout New Zealand. They remind me a lot of the towns from my childhood when I used to go around with my parents and used to get an ice cream in some of these towns around the country, as it used to in those days. But it's a challenge to, it's a bit worrying when I've actually been to most of these towns myself to work out how many you've actually been to and then how many you actually don't know of. But it just tells you how far and deep this network really is going. Blackball, Turua, Opotiki, Kuss, which is a little town just in the Canterbury Plains, Hokio Beach, Manapuri. These are small settlements. Hahe, which is obviously a beach resort in the Coromandel. And we are seeing in every case, we're seeing very pleasing, above forecast, rapid uptake in these areas, a lot of pent up demand, which I think, very, very, very encouraging. Next slide. COVID, and the Minister talked about this. We lost the tower up north there. You can see it was actually burnt down for an arson. And then you can see the tower that's actually been fully replaced. It's a 4G only tower. So RCG, was both of us had essential services, because one of the things the government was keen to ensure during the lockdown that we continued to provide rural connectivity, given the coverage gaps and some of the digital divide gaps out there. So RCG managed to get another 29 on air, and the WISPs continued with some build and some focused connections. Mike can touch on that. There were some supply chain issues, which no doubt Mike and John can talk about, but mostly they were sort of overcome. Vulnerable customers, essential services were prioritised, as you would know. The UFB build did actually cease during that period, and then it started again. And the interesting thing about the UFB connections, it was a perfect V. It was the V-shaped recovery, which we'd like our economy to be in. Effectively, the connections the previous month, basically, and then we lost the month of lockdown, and then the following month, the orders were effectively the same. It was actually a little bit higher post-lockdown, and they're continuing to go. And the networks, as the Minister mentioned, particularly the fibre networks and the WISP networks in particular, and some of the wireless and the other wireless networks all performed largely quite well during this period as well. So there's plenty of capacity in those fibre networks. Right, next slide. So I'm just going to sort of flick through some quick ones on towers here. We actually put our names on them of where they are, just so you can see the infrastructure. We do play this game with Mike and his Whisper colleagues of we don't put the names on, we don't put the logos on and get them to guess whose each other's towers are. It's quite interesting to see how many of them get them right and how many get them wrong. So here's a couple of towers here, Burling Flats and Pohara. If you click onto the next one. TPAC, that's a full off-grid tower that the radios on there were actually dropped in by a chopper. So these are the mobile, obviously the RCG towers. You can see they're quite different to the normal towers. Are quite flat, full band spectrum antennas on those, so they can be upgraded for the full range of spectrum as well. And then they don't need to be as high as the other towers because they have more powerful range. Next slide. Here we go, Wiz Wireless and Wairapa, Bridget and her team, Primo, Matt and his team. That's one of his latest towers with the new Cambian equipment on. Next slide. Here we go, AmuriNet. So that's Chris down there in northern Canterbury. His towers, he usually takes the most scenic shots. And then we've got InspireNet there, obviously in the Manawatu. Next slide. Wi-Fi Connect, the guys at Ivan and Wi-Fi Connect, so they're doing some stuff at the very bottom of the west coast for us, and basically do your areas, so challenging areas. Zealand, Mark, he's on the west coast, so he's doing basically areas of Bulla and Grey, and obviously that's challenging terrain, and we've just reached a deal there where he's actually going to backhaul, use the backhaul for a couple of the RCG sites. So it shows the good cooperation that we're getting there between the two industry players there. The next slide, if you go there, UBB, that's one for Mike, obviously in Canterbury, Kiwi Wi-Fi up in Tasman. They're building out some of those areas in the deeper Tasman area around Golden Bay. Next slide. Lightwire, building out effectively through Western Bay of Plenty and Waikato. NZ Tech, he's building out in the Hawke's Bay there with their technology. Next slide. You see we've got a few partners here. Pacific Net, obviously Sue and her team are building out there through Marlborough and parts of Nelson and Tasman as well. And AONet, Lachlan, he's got the short straw, and he's got the challenge of doing King Country, which is an extraordinary challenging area to bring connectivity to. But we're getting some really good feedback there. A lot of the Mirais there are actually going to be connected through his network as well. And we just had some Mirais connected there, and they've been, but they thought there was something wrong with the broadband connection. It was so fast. So it just gives you, they thought it was a fault. They couldn't believe it. So that just shows you the difference and the step change that these networks are making out there in rural New Zealand. So yeah, we're very pleased with the performance of our partners. They are doing a really good job. Lots of towers and lots of scenic places. So yeah, so it's probably enough of me, I think, Craig.
I did the famous mute thing.
Good.
Someone had to do it today, and it might as well be me. Right, thank you so much for all the information in that update. Look, there are a couple of questions that we want to put to you that have come in, and everyone can obviously see them. The first one is, hi Graham, the quarterly updates are really helpful to understanding RBI and RBI2 build progress. Is it possible to get an update of how actual uptake of the services is going?
Yes, and I think that's an excellent question that you can ask Mike, because we are quite keen to get the uptake numbers, and we are quite keen to publish those. It's a matter of getting them all from the partners. So we have seen some encouraging signs, but I think that's a great question to put to Mike and his members.
Okay, we might hold that.
And we would like to get that data, by the way. We are trying to get it, so...
Okay.
If Mike knows.
Yeah, well, he gets to speak next, so he'll be able to follow on from that. There's a question here from Ernie Newman around, progress is impressive. How can we persuade farmers, and I presume he's talking about people in rural, to stop complaining about what they haven't got, start using what they have for smart farm development? That's a big question.
Yeah, I think one of the key things there that we do find this quite a lot is a lot of people out there don't actually know what's available. Literally, they don't know what's available. And we do actively encourage, and I think it needs, be a good thing for the industry to push more, I think, is having the broadband map really updated. Our friends at Internet New Zealand have done a really fantastic upgrade to that now. It's a great graphical interface. But I think us in the industry use it. But I don't think a lot of people out there use it. Every time we talk to a council, we mention it. But I think, if you're out there, you should use it. And we obviously actively encourage the industry to keep that updated as much as possible and as accurate as possible. It does have the build plans on there, so it does tell people when they're going to be covered. And I think that's the key thing. So if people know they're covered, And then I think the other thing to Ernie's question there is, it's an industry challenge. How do you get that quite geeky stuff about IoT and things like that, which most people don't really understand if you're a farmer or you're working in pastoral out there, is how do you translate that into terms where you're sort of saying is, wouldn't it be fantastic that you can be in your house every morning, you can get up and you can understand what all your feedlots look like right across your farm, without having to jump on your side-by-side and spend 2 hours driving around your farm finding where they are, or finding where the hikers have left your gates open, or what your water levels are, or what your nitrogen levels are, what's happening around the edges of your streams, etc., effectively just from an app on your phone. And this stuff is as cheap as chips. You can put a lot on. I think there's one farm told me they've got like 500 devices on their phone, on their farm. So it is, and working with the local fed farmers people, I think it is really, put your swan dry on, put your boots on, and you have to get out there and talk to people. And I think it's another great question for Mike, I think, because I think the WISPs, whether we're using it off their network or the NBIT or off the mobile towers or the LoRa and the various, flavors of IoT, is the WISPs are on the ground and are the technology providers that can actually help install that technology. No matter what the sort of access backbone is, you do need people who know how to put these little things in place and get them going. And when they break, what to do, which is largely just go and replace it with another one because they're so cheap.
Here's a great question from Andrew from Mobile Health. It seems there's a very coordinated implementation with lots of excellent partnerships. In comparison to other countries' implementations, what grade would we give New Zealand progress? Are we A+ or B-? We need to do more?
Yeah, well, it's always hard to grade yourself, isn't it? I think we're doing really well. We do look at other countries. We do look at comparable countries. And interesting enough, I've just been invited to speak to the UK. It's an ungodly hour of my night about what they're doing. And the UK is the same size as us geographically, and obviously many more people, but they're really struggling with mobile coverage and wireless coverage out there in their rural areas. And they want to learn from us what we've done in the mobile space, what we're doing with the WISPs, and how we're actually covering that. So I think we're doing really well in that space. I think we're doing better than Australia. Certainly, I think we're doing better than a lot of areas of the US, although some areas of the US are doing quite well. I think like the Appalachians, for example, have got quite good coverage through local farmers and things like that. So I think we are getting up there. I think, the fibre footprint solves a lot of that problem because it does help with the backhaul. And I think we've reached the edge almost of the coverage. And I think the minister's key issue there was ensuring that capacity is there in what you call the donut. And I think that's the big thing we need to lift going forward. And we've found some funding for that. There will be some more to be done there. Obviously, in conjunction with the operators. So, I think that's the area where to focus on. Demand is increasing, concurrent use is increasing. We've seen that with Zoom and people watching Netflix at the same time, and you see the pixelation happening, and then you have to see, dad or mum running there tell the kids to get off Netflix so they can have their business call. People. Video is going to happen. It's going to be a data-rich environment. That's what people want. And most people don't even know now when they're looking at Netflix. The average person out there, when they're looking at Netflix, doesn't actually know it's coming through the internet if they're watching it on their main TV.
Look, thank you so much for your time today, Graham. Always good to hear from you and hear the update. There's a couple of questions I couldn't ask. I'm going to send them through to you in the next couple of days, and we'll see if you can give some answers to those. But otherwise, thanks so much for your time today.
Sure.